My husband, 31M, and I, 31M, have known our friend Dylan, 32M, since grade school. Dylan was in our wedding party. He was one of my husband's groomsmen. We've been so close. He's like a brother to us. Dylan was one of the most intelligent, down-to-earth, adventurous people we knew. He studied hard in school to become an engineer, and he worked hard at that for a number of years. He went to Everest and climbed to base camp. He started up an app and it got really big and popular and ended up selling it and making a ton of money. He's traveled the world. Anyways, you get it. He's done really well for himself, and he's been a good friend to my husband and I. Back in 2020, when COVID was really bad and running rampant, Dylan ended up getting laid off. He still had quite a bit of money, so he wasn't really worried about it. But he spent a lot of time alone. Like a lot. And my husband and I really think that time alone got to him. Within the year, he became really against COVID restrictions. He'd fight the system. He refused to get his vaccinations and bought into all of the conspiracy theories. And because he didn't get his vaccinations, he couldn't find a job that would accept him, because at the time, a lot of jobs were requiring you to be vaccinated. On top of that, we had our first baby and we weren't being super strict on visitations, but we preferred people to be vaccinated. So because he wasn't vaccinated, he didn't get to see our firstborn for about a year or so. But during that time, Dylan ended up telling us some wild stories about his life and what was happening. He kept telling us that he could hear this drilling sound in his apartment. He looked all over his apartment for what was causing this sound. He said it drove him nuts when he was trying to sleep because that's when it was the loudest. He said the drilling wasn't all of the time, but usually at strange hours of the night. He finally discovered the location of the noise and it was right underneath his bed. Then he ended up hearing banging. And the floor was vibrating. He tells us that the woman who lived below him was trying to drill their way up to his apartment through the floor. Then somehow he came to the conclusion that this person was trying to kill him. From there it really escalated, but at the time, we fully believed him. We didn't think anything was wrong with him because he even had video evidence of this drilling sound. Later it turns out that this person underneath him was just doing some renovations at weird hours of the day because they were a nurse and they worked strange hours. Anyways, he tells us that the apartment is lives and is actually used for trafficking, and he was making a bunch of allegations about the apartment building owner, and then somehow he dragged his dad into it. Yes, this all seems far-fetched, but at the time, we fully believed him and supported him. I mean, Dylan was terrified. I mean, he would come over to our house, and he'd cry in my arms. Before this, I had never seen him cry or show emotion like that. He had always had his head on his shoulders. I mean, well, once he dragged his dad into it, he texted us one day and said that he was getting committed and he didn't know when he'd be out. Yes, committed as in one flew over the cuckoo's nest. Straight jacket. Padded walls. Yeah. But he had this explanation for it. He said that he had found out information on this apartment owner and how it connected to his father, and now these people were trying to silence him, and it was a whole big thing and so much bigger than what we understood. He said he didn't want to tell us too much because it would drag us into it and he didn't want to endanger us. But when he got out, we allowed him over to tell his story, but he made us power down all of our electronics. Well, at this point, my husband and I are kind of like, not sure how we feel about this, but we don't want to just not be there for him because he's our best friend and we care for him. We want to be able to support him. And parts of his story are still making sense. He's connecting the dots. He's like, these people threw me in the loony bin to shut me up. They gave me some pills to make me lose my mind. And now at the time, my husband and I were like, wow. Yes. We've seen the movies. This checks out. This makes sense. But then we asked ourselves, well, why? Why is Dylan so important? Why would they care about Dylan? He's just one guy. We're sure people who are into dark things like whatever Dylan was tapping into deal with little guys all the time and can just brush them off. And then we thought, well, yeah. What better way to deal with a little guy than to make them seem like they're crazy, isolate them, and have them doubt themselves? So time goes on and Dylan ends up selling his apartment and getting out of the building because he believed people in the building were trying to kill him. He goes to live with his aunt, who is the only person in his family who is talking to him at the time because he's accused his dad of some pretty heavy shit. And in that time, he gets committed another 2 times. He's in the mental health facility for 30 plus days at a time. After a while at his aunt's, he then somehow brings up how his aunt is feeding information to these people who are trying to silence him and kill him. But he doesn't blame her because he said she's probably doing it because they control the money she's getting for her long-term disability. Okay. We guess that could check out. But now my husband and I are sort of like, perhaps there's something wrong with Dylan. Don't ask us why it took us this long to kind of reach this conclusion, but we really wanted to support and believe him. So my husband and I switched gears and just wanted to listen to him. We were like, "Kay, he just needs someone to talk to, so we'll just listen." But clearly there's something going on with Dylan. So now we're in 2023. March. Dylan comes over to our place to see our second born. He actually looks good. He's starting to look healthy and more like himself. Before this, he was on some medication that made him gain some weight, which was also unlike him, But medication can't be helped with that sometimes. Medication can be bad for making people gain weight, especially meds that are supposed to help with your mental health. I was on antidepressants a few years back and it made me gain weight like mad, so I went off of them. Now, I will say that between 2020 and Dec of 2022, Dylan was looking rough. I mean, he'd come over to our place and he'd look all sketched out and his lips and eyes would be twitching. And he just looked like he was on the brink of crying and being emotional all of the time. This was unusual of us to see. Dylan was always the strong guy in our friendship. He'd always be the guy you'd go to who would have all of the answers. So it was odd being on the other side of this. Anyways, he breaks it to us that his sister died of an overdose and he thinks that she was given something that was laced with something. And in the same conversation, he spills the beans that his sister was schizophrenic. Bingo. There it is. My husband and I's light bulb goes off and we sort of glance at each other and suddenly it all makes sense. Then he says that he's moving about 12 hours away to the coast. He said he has to get away from here because he's being watched. He said that he can hear a woman on his phone trying to talk to him when he's talking to someone else. He said he can hear this same woman on the radio when he's driving around listening to music. Then he tells us that there's an older woman at this bar across the street from his aunt's, and these people who were trying to kill him hired her to act as a bartender to drug him and listen to him ranting at the bar. He said she asks him a bunch of questions that suggest she knows what the answers are, but she's just testing him to make sure that he doesn't say anything he shouldn't. My husband and I just sort of nod along with this. So then he tells us that he's moving away to live in this trailer park and live the rest of days with peace and quiet on the coast. He said he has enough money to live humbly. So we're both like, wow. Good for you, man. Get away from all of this BS. Then he's on the coast for a few months and he calls my husband and he's crying and he's saying that he tried to get a little job at this laundromat just for something to do, but the guy at the laundromat was talking to him and he knew too much about Dylan. Dylan was crying on the phone and he said that this TV crew is also trying to film him and they installed cameras in his car and outside his trailer. So my husband is trying to calm him down and he's just listening to him at this point. And Dylan's like, I can't trust anyone. This is my reality. And I can hear this going on and it just all solidifies exactly what we've been thinking and our hunches. Surely, Dylan has schizophrenia too. I mean, a camera crew? Dylan. Honey. You need help. Then he ends up getting kicked out of his trailer park for starting a fight with some other resident and he's forced to come back, but he doesn't have a place to live. So he shacks up in some hotel. But he's not telling us where. He also asked to come over for coffee a few times, but we both said we were busy and that it wasn't a good time with a new baby. And he told us that on the drive back, a camera crew in their cars followed him all the way back. And they ended up staying in the same hotel as him. And they snuck cameras into his room. Well, at this point, we're debating telling his parents because we're not just if they even know how bad it's getting. We don't hear from him for the longest time. We reach out to him. No answer. We call and leave messages. No answer. So we start to get a little worried until one day we get a group message. But in the group message, Dylan says, back off CIA scumbags, should never have trusted you. And so my husband and I kind of look at each other like, did he just call us members of the CIA? And then he blasts us on social media and calls us CIA and says that we can't be trusted. And we get people messaging us like, is Dylan okay? And we're like, do we tell them what's been going on? And so we chose not to tell them because we didn't want to slander his name, but we basically said that he's going through some stuff. He's just still stressed about his sister's passing. People bought it. But we sadly ended up having to block him on social media. He was just saying some ruthless stuff about us and literally calling us the CIA and that we were feeding them information about him. Why? Ike, what information we would have on him that we could possibly give to the CIA? And if we even were the CIA, we wouldn't be living in our 3-bedroom little single-family home, I tell you that much. So then a few weeks after that, we get another message sent from him to the same group chat. This time, he says if we don't back off, he's going to get our kids taken away. Well, that was that. My husband basically responded and said, we love you, Dylan, but you need help. Please don't text or call us again. Then Dylan sends another text and he says, watch your backs. And after that, we take screenshots and block him on everything. I then call the police and I tell them what happened. They tell us we did everything right and if we want, we can file something that would get him committed again because we have reason to believe that he needs some help mentally and needs to speak to someone to get better. So I go down to the courthouse to get that figured out. But right as I come back, I pull up to our house and I see Dylan at the front door with a hammer in his hand. He starts running up to my SUV and he's screaming at me, my babies are in the car, and he's like, you fed them everything. I told you everything and I trusted you and you gave them all of the insider information. Then he goes on about how he's on a game show and he's the best contestant they've had yet and he's really going to give them a show. And he starts hitting my SUV with a hammer. I'm trying to dial the police and back up at the same time, but he's just following out of the driveway. Both of my babies are screaming their heads off at this point. I'm shaking and crying and trying to tell the cops where I live and what's going on. Within minutes they show up and have poor Dylan at gunpoint, and he's dropped to the grass and he's laying there while they're putting handcuffs on him. The hammer is on the ground. My windshield is all smashed up and the hood of my SUV is destroyed. I call my husband and I tell him what happened. He's literally livid and says not to go anywhere and that Hess coming home ASAP. While they're taking Dylan away and putting him into the back of the car, he's screaming at nothing and he's saying, "Are you not entertained? I want my bonus. I want my bonus." And I'm sitting in the SUV trying to soothe my babies, but I'm also bawling at this point, wondering how the heck some guy like Dylan just got to this point and how our mental health facilities fail people like this by not giving them the proper help and aid and offer services that help them get better, and it just ends up putting not only them but other people in danger. The cops asked me if I want to press charges and I said yes. It killed me to say yes, but I did. That night, I end up calling his mom and she answers and we tell her everything that's happened, like lay it on her. And she tells me that I'm not the only one to call her and tell her this. She said that unfortunately her and Dylan's dad have done all they can do and it's really out of their hands. She said that the facilities just don't hold him long enough and don't seem to be helping. She said it can take years for them to figure out the proper medication. And then that only works if he chooses to take the medication. Which he hasn't. She just kept apologizing and she feels so bad, and she said that we should get a restraining order and stay clear of him. She said that we did our best and he's so lucky to have friends like us who listen and support him. And she starts crying and telling me that she's lost not only her daughter but her son and it's been so hard. I just feel terrible. Mental health is no joke. We ended up getting a restraining order and we haven't heard from Dylan since. I mean, that could also be because he's currently committed or something, but yeah. I still feel scared. Whenever the doorbell rings, I'm scared that it's him. We invested in some more cameras and a heavier duty security system. It's hard. We feel sad, angry, and all the emotions. He's just not someone we recognize anymore. We miss the old Dylan. We wish there was more we could do, but we have to prioritize the safety of our own family. He's not our responsibility. Now on to the next story. Story 2. Accidentally found 280 emails proving my wife was cheating on me with my best friend, so I tricked them both into a group dinner, exposed everything and cleaned them out in the divorce. I, 34 male, met my wife, 33 female, 10 years ago at a small art gallery in the city. My best friend, let's call him Oliver, was an artist and he was showing a piece there. My wife was there with one of her friends and I approached her as soon as I saw her. I thought she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen and I had to be with her. My wife's friend, let's call her Mia, actually ended up going home with Oliver that night. Somehow Oliver and I ended up marrying best friends. We thought it was funny, but it was really perfect for all four of us. We went on double dates together all the time, we took trips together, and we even planned vacations together. The four of us were practically inseparable. My wife was a librarian, so she didn't have much opportunity to travel for work. However, I worked in advertising and I traveled often to film commercials. We were used to my schedule for the most part. Oliver and Mia both worked from home on a business that I ran together online. So, when I was gone I knew that my wife spent a lot of time with Oliver and Mia. I didn't mind it at all. I was glad that she had somebody there to keep her company. During one of the work trips that I had planned, my computer had an issue with the screen, so I sent it to Geek Squad to have it repaired. While I was gone, I took my wife's computer since she rarely used it at home anyway. I got to my hotel room when my plane landed and went to use the computer to check some emails and get some work done. You can always tell when somebody clears a history on something. My wife didn't use the computer a lot, but I knew that she used it. There should have been histories of Christmas gifts she was planning on buying, bookstores, and her personal email accounts. However, the history was completely blank. I was a little curious about why she cleared the history before giving me the computer. Granted, it was her personal computer and she probably looked things up that she didn't want me to know about. If the shoe were on the other foot, I would have cleared my history before giving my computer to my wife. I didn't give it too much thought after that because I didn't think that my wife would do anything sketchy. However, moments later I accidentally logged into her email using the saved information that she had instead of using my own. It sounds convenient, but it genuinely was an accident. I was so used to using my credentials that way that I just pressed OK without giving it a second thought. I went to log out of it right away when I realized, but then I saw an email exchange between my wife and Oliver. The message in the inbox was the most recent one out of a 280 email chain. I knew that they were friends. All four of us were. But I had no idea that they were having private conversations with each other. It struck me as very odd. I clicked on it to see what it was, and I was completely broken by what I found. They were having an affair with each other. They were sending each other explicit videos and images through email and planning the times when they would be able to get together. I didn't read through all the messages, but I did look at some of the first ones that they sent to try and figure out when it started. The affair had been going on for 2 years. Anytime I was away from home, Oliver and my wife took that opportunity to be together. They slept together even when I wasn't on a working trip. There were times when my wife would sneak Oliver into the library after it was closed and have sex with him when nobody else was in the building. Early on, there were some emails about possibly bringing me and Mia in on the situation and swinging. It was Oliver who suggested it, but my wife immediately told him that I wouldn't be okay with it. She was right to think that. Oliver thought that Mia might have been convincible, stating that he thought she would be gullible enough to just do what he wanted. I thought that was a horrible thing to say. I ended up converting all of those emails into a PDF and keeping that for myself. I marked the most recent messages unread and logged out to make it seem like I had no idea what was happening. I was going to be away for 3 days working, and I had to focus on what I was doing or I could risk losing my job. It was absolute torture trying to pretend like nothing was happening when it felt like my entire world was shattering. I had the PDF and I needed to figure out the best way to utilize it. My wife and best friend had both betrayed me and I wanted to get back at them and make them regret ever crossing me. I mulled over what I could do when I returned and it finally hit me. It was the middle of summer and it wasn't anything out of the ordinary to invite Oliver and Mia over for a barbecue and some drinks. I suggested it for the weekend when I got back and my wife was all for it. They showed up on that Saturday and everything was normal. While we were eating, I brought up to everyone the possibility that we trade partners for the night. It was a joke, I had no intention of doing that, but I just wanted to see their reactions. Mia was appalled by what I suggested, but noticeably my wife and Oliver weren't that shocked. Oliver's lack of reaction actually upset Mia quite a bit. My wife pulled me aside and asked me about why I suggested that, but I just went back to the table and I told Oliver that it was his idea after all. I quoted what he said in the email and mentioned that he thought that Mia would be gullible and would go for it. She was very confused, so I handed her a couple of pages of the email highlights that I printed out. She read over them and from the context she figured out what was happening very quickly. She immediately started screaming at my wife and Oliver about what they did. She was hysterical and upset about everything, and I didn't blame her. I felt the same way when I first found out. Oliver tried to punch me in the face. He accused me of ruining his life. I didn't fight him. As much as I wanted to take my anger out on him, I knew that it would only lead to more drama. My wife tried to explain what was happening to me, but nothing she said helped her. Basically, she said that she and Oliver had always been attracted to each other and after a while, they couldn't take it anymore. They ended up sleeping together. She told me that she didn't think monogamy was for her either, which would have been nice to know before I was married to her for 6 years. Mia and I both ended up divorcing them and pretty much taking everything from them in the divorce. They said that they were attracted to each other, but after everything happened they didn't even try to be together. Oliver desperately tried to get back with Mia because he said that it was a mistake and she almost gave in to be with him. I was able to talk her out of it. I sent the information about my wife sleeping with Oliver in the library to her boss and she was fired. Now, she lives in a studio apartment in the city. She's reached out to me several times apologizing and suggesting that we give it another try. I think she's realized just how good she had it with me and regrets her choices now. I'm in a good place now after all of this and I don't want to look back at any of it. I'm finally ready to put myself back out there and move on from it completely.